Thank you, Lucy. I appreciate that introduction. And once again, this is Kevin Pruitt with Rising Tide Startups. And my special guest today is David Tao. David, thank you for joining us on Rising Tide.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
It is a pleasure to have you. And we're kind of going for the whole Jack Media family. We're trying to get the mom and the dad and all the kids on the podcast here. So this is going to be, I asked you offline if, we had one of your co-founders that was on the podcast earlier, like late in 2019. And I wanted to ask you, just make sure that you could refute everything he said, or maybe you're going to agree with a couple of things.
Well, if we can get a 50% agreement, 50% disagreement, I call that par for the course. That just sounds like a business.
That actually sounds like marriage closer to than it does a business partnership.
It's basically that.
It's like a friend of mine calls me his work wife, because we spend so much time together. But yeah, I'm just not quite secure enough to handle that. But we'll go with it. So, well, David, tell our listeners a little bit about David Tao.
Sure. Well, I was born and raised in central Kentucky, which surprises a lot of people because I live in Brooklyn, New York now, and our offices in Brooklyn.
A lot of similarities.
It's basically the same thing, except it's completely different. No, I was born and raised in Kentucky, which was a great place to grow up. Spending a lot of time in the woods, the hiking, fishing, all that. You name it, shooting bows and arrows, you name it, probably did it growing up. Did 4-H, Boy Scouts, all that jazz. Was really, really fortunate to have a family that said, maybe you should get outside of Kentucky a little bit before you decide where you want to be eventually. So I actually ended up going to boarding school for high school in Tennessee, which is not that much different from Kentucky, let's be honest. And then from there, went to school, went to college, went to Harvard University. Was very lucky to meet just so many diverse groups of people there. Being out of the South for the first time was just like such a really good introduction to the variety of people and perspectives that exist in the world. And it was just 4 years of me learning that there's more there's more than what I was experiencing under this little rock that kind of my family was in. Not that there's anything wrong with Kentucky, absolutely wonderful place, but getting out and getting exposed to different groups was fantastic. Moved to New York after that because I thought it'd be cool because, bright lights, big city, that's where the action is. There's Broadway, there's Times Square. And once I realized that Times Square, you want to avoid at all costs, New York made a lot more sense, but I ended up sticking around. I got my start in business journalism, actually wrote for Fortune.com for a bit, but very shortly thereafter was kind of yanked by startup world and ended up becoming the first editorial director at a health and wellness content startup. So I went from like business content journalism in kind of the old guard magazine world to very quickly like digital first startup content, where I really kind of cut my teeth, built early editorial teams, hired people, kind of figured all that out on the fly when I was very young and very inexperienced, and I'm sure made a ton of mistakes along the way. That's kind of how I became involved in the health and fitness content space. I'd always had an interest in wellness. I was a competitive weightlifter. I'm still a CrossFitter these days. I co-owned a CrossFit gym for a number of years, so just kind of fit into the path my life was taking outside the office. Left that role, ended up doing content consulting for a number of years, working with some like major Fortune 500 companies, working with startups, basically all sorts of companies that needed content or wanted to build content teams. I helped them do that, helped them figure out what to write, who to hire, all that good stuff. And then in early 2016, I had known my current co-founders and business partners for a while. We came together and they had some existing brands they were running. They kind of had this thesis of owning and operating really high quality niche content brands. We launched BarBend in early 2016 under that banner. It was an idea I'd had for a while, but just didn't have the business partners and resources to launch it myself. So once I found that, it was kind of off to the races. And here we are, almost 4 years later, our team's grown. BarBend is alive and well and growing today. Seen a lot of great growth so far in 2020. And not only do we have writers and editors, but videographers, audio professionals, graphic designers. We're truly a multimedia brand right now. It gives me a lot of pride and joy every day.
So if you're in the weightlifting space, so is there another site that would be a rival site, or did you chase one? Did you kind of pattern yourself after one, or walk us through that?
That's a really good question. There's nothing quite like us. Now, there are things that are less
Right.
niche,
Sure.
doesn't matter, is
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
And
Whether you're from France or Kentucky, it doesn't matter. Yeah. You have to
yeah,
choose.
whatever you want. There's things that are less specific and more specific, but BarBend is kind of, we've actually changed it a little bit. We're broadening our scope. But when we started, it was for strength athletes by strength athletes. So by that, I mean covering weightlifting, powerlifting, CrossFit, strongman, anywhere, any sport that was testing how strong you are in some capacity, like a pure test of strength. And news, analysis, opinion. So what's happening? How do you train? What's going on? There wasn't anyone doing that across all strength sports, really. So I think we were kind of the first. Now, there are other sites out there now that have popped up, I think, trying to do some of what we do. But I think as far as making it a true multimedia brand, so having the videos and the podcasts and media partnerships with the sports governing bodies and doing things like live broadcasting the CrossFit games, we are, I think, currently the only brand really doing that at scale across the strength sports. Now, some people are doing great content, but just in CrossFit. Some people are doing great content, but just in weightlifting. And the cool thing is we get to work with a lot of those brands that are even more niche than we are, because our platform might be a little bit bigger. We might have some more general eyeballs. So I think if you go up or down the chain, you'll find some people doing what we're doing. But as far as multimedia across strength sports, I think we're kind of on our own there.
So when you launched in 2016, so walk us through kind of that year, 18 months right before that said, okay, I am kind of transitioning out of maybe the content consultation space. It's kind of it almost seems like it's a rolling job for the last 5 or 10 years leading up to that space. Would that be a good description?
Definitely for the previous 2 years. I had some clients that I was working with, very regularly. But even then, sometimes I'd work with those clients, and then I'd end up working with their clients. So even if I was at one place for a while, it felt like I was at 4 places for a while. And I was on the road a lot. A lot of it was health and fitness based, not all of it, but a lot of it was health and fitness based. I even did some writing for the CrossFit Games website at that time. I was just kind of bouncing all around, and it did feel like a little bit I felt a little bit like a rolling stone. I was picking up a lot of great experiences. I was working with cool people and meeting cool people, but it was a lifestyle that honestly I didn't thrive in, if I'm going to be honest. And I think a big reason that I settled back. I was always living in New York. That was the home base. But at one point I was on the road for, 26, 27 weeks of the year, more than half the year. And some people thrive under that. I've worked with some people who were just road warriors. And man, what they did, the deals they closed, the progress they made, it was impressive. And they were bouncing back and forth all up and down the East Coast, internationally. It was not a lifestyle I thrived at. I need a home base.
Yep.
I need some grounding. Not that I don't like traveling.
Right.
But I can't be on the road for half the year. It's just I'm not going to be at my best. And I'm not going to perform my best. And the people I'm working with aren't going to get the best out of me. It took me a while to realize that, frankly. And I feel bad that it did take me 2 years to realize that. But hey, it's a truth I kind of live with now,
Well, I mean, I love the idea of kind of this niche space that you were talking about, that you kind of, like we said so many times on the podcast, nothing is wasted, leading up to kind of how this whole thing culminates in your life. And, you can probably look back and see how all the pieces kind of fit together to bring you to this, a time such as this. But walk me through the process of sitting down with your co-founders or the co-founders of Jack Media and say, okay, we're going to start a niche site and this is how we're going to make money. And I mean, it sounded like to me that they had already kind of perfected the McDonald's hamburger before you showed up, and they were kind of giving you that sales pitch that said, hey, all you got to do is show up. We got to do content. This is the secret formula and it's going to pay off, but it's going to take 2 years to get there.
There was no secret formula, and the formula is always changing. That's the thing about content, and I don't know if we had the best grasp of that back then. I think, you find a way. I'll give an analogy. You hear a lot of people who started websites in 2005, and they made a lot of money because they put Google AdSense on their site,
sure.
and Google sent them big checks every month when they got some traffic, right?
Not so much anymore.
Those checks got smaller over time.
Yeah,
over time.
The decimal point started moving.
It started moving the wrong direction. And when we started, the cool thing about BarBend was, we did raise a round of seed. We bootstrapped and self-funded, and then we raised a round of seed funding. And we said, let's focus on building the brand, and then we'll worry about revenue. I wish we'd been a little more revenue focused earlier on. It is what it is. It's a big focus for us now. But the key for us has been diversification of revenue, right? It's not just being all in on Google AdSense. That's the only check we're getting. Diversification of revenue is important for us. It's funny. I was just looking at some numbers for this month and looking at our estimated YouTube revenue, and I'm like, cool. Count that in a different bucket than what you count from Google. But wait a minute, guess who owns YouTube? It's so funny. But diversification of revenue is important. So on-site advertising, obviously a big source of revenue for us. We write a lot of news content. We get a lot of traffic. That's always going to be a source of revenue for us, right? Hoping that we can, work with ad inventory that's high quality and doesn't disrupt the reader experience too much. Monetization through things like YouTube videos. Sure, it's not I'm going to be honest, it's not our primary source of revenue, but I'm not going to not count it, right? It's something we pay attention to. Sponsored content, things like podcast sponsorships, so our podcast grows. Sponsored content on site, sponsored video on our channels. Increasingly important for us. And we've worked with brands big and small. We worked with Under Armour on 2 big sponsored content packages that featured articles, motion graphics, video in 2019, hoping to work with them again soon on brands like that. Tons of fun. Our editorial team really enjoys it. You really get to push the envelope there in helping those kind of companies reach a specific audience that we have. There are a lot of different paths to revenue. And I think that BarBend, we've explored direct apparel sales before. We've had some success there. We're not doing that so much right now because we wanted to focus more on content production, but that was a profitable source of revenue for us for a time. It's something we might explore again. Digital products, obviously a big source online that a lot of major media outlets are moving toward.
Right.
These are all things that we either have explored, are exploring, or know we will explore. Right. And when it comes to revenue, especially when content is your product, right? It's nothing that's tangible. It's not like people are buying, a pair of shoes or, a safety razor from you. You have to make sure content is monetized across different platforms in different ways.
Right.
Because if one of those platforms shifts and changes, you don't want your company to be a house of cards that completely collapses just because Facebook updated an algorithm.
Exactly. I mean, you've heard this horror stories of the pandas and the penguins and all the other animals out there that have virtually caused sites to close overnight. That's
well, now that they're doing after states, there's like the Florida update, I think. Next we'll have the Oklahoma updates. So they ran out of, I guess it's like hurricanes when they run out of names and circle back through. So now
we're out of animals, so
down to states.
Yeah, it's going to be soon. The Russia update is going to shut everything down. So, that's what's coming next. So
no comment. I'm of Russian extraction.
Stay apolitical here. That's right.
Yeah, I have to be careful what I say. I have some Russian-speaking family members who might be.
I actually think they're listening to the podcast.
I have to be careful.
That's right. That's right. They heard everything anyway. So, so walk us through I'm just curious if you were going back 2 years from now. You said you kind of learned some lessons, or actually it's closer to 4 years now. So you learned some lessons on the kind of the whole path you've taken since you started, BarBend. What would be, say, 1 or 2 things that you would just say, oh, man, I wish we knew this day one, that would have been a game changer?
I wish we punched up in media partnerships a little bit earlier. It's funny, we live streamed the CrossFit Games last year. And to be fair, the CrossFit Games underwent a lot of changes over the past few years. And last year was the first year that a site like ours could have live streamed the games because previously, like CBS had an exclusive, Facebook had an exclusive, ESPN for a time had an exclusive on packages from the CrossFit Games. So it wasn't like in 2016, the first year we were around, we could have just flipped the switch and put the games live on our site. It wasn't going to happen. But in talking to folks at CrossFit HQ, some of whom I knew because I did a little bit of writing for HQ, did a little bit of work with them. They were, when we were talking to them last year and prepped to stream the games, they were kind of like, yeah, why haven't we done anything with y'all before? Like, we know who you are. We like what you do. We if you had approached us, we would have worked with you on maybe creating some sort of partnership or doing some sort of exclusive content or working with you to release stories under embargo. Like we would have done that sooner. And the answer is, I just assumed the answer was going to be no.
Yeah.
Because
wow.
Because I was like, oh, we're not big enough. Well, what does big enough really mean if you're in a niche space, right?
Right.
It is. It turns out we're pretty big for our space. We partnered with USA Weightlifting. We've had that partnership now for about 3 years. We partnered with them when we were under a year old and became their official media partner. That should have rung a bell in my head and been like, wait a minute, we're the official media partner of the official governing body of weightlifting in the United States. We can probably approach a lot of different people to work with them. And I think that I had a hesitancy because I was like, oh, we're not big enough yet. Oh, we don't have these numbers yet. Oh, our audience needs to get a little bigger. We should have just forged some of these relationships sooner. They're strong relationships right now. We're very thankful for them. We enjoy them. We should have just done it earlier.
Now, I would think that your audience is primarily based in the States, but probably has a global reach to it. Where are kind of the hot pockets around the globe in this space in general? I'm thinking maybe Eastern Europe. I'm thinking, where are some of the places?
So the big ones, Australia, huge. Fitness is, CrossFit took off like hotcakes in Australia,
Sure.
but big weightlifting culture there, all sorts of stuff, right? Australia, very big sporting culture, and strength sports are a part of that. The UK, pretty big following there. Canada, obviously. I almost count Canada and the US as kind of like one unit for those for certain metrics. I shouldn't. It's a very distinct country.
Yeah.
A lot of French speakers up there, but those are kind of some pockets. And we have a growing readership in India, China, Eastern Europe. We do have a readership. I think that, frankly, while strength sports have a long history and pedigree in like the former Soviet states and in Eastern Europe and things like that, there's just a language barrier. And Google can translate anything, but at the same time, like, we're not writing things in Russian. We're not writing things in Polish. It's not the language of origin for our content. Yeah. So it is primarily English-speaking countries right now. But I mean, we see traffic from all over. Brazil's a growing audience for us, which is kind of cool to see, and obviously a pretty long history of fitness culture and strength culture in Brazil as well. So no big surprise there.
So walk me through kind of the strategy. You've mentioned the podcast a couple of times. Walk me through the strategy of how the podcast and, say, the site integrate. One feeds the other? I mean, one supports the other. How do those two pieces fit together?
The podcast it's a branding element, right? So it's like, are we meeting people? Like BarBend.com is the home of BarBend. It's a website, but in order to be a brand, you have to meet people on the platforms they exist on, right? Like our website, we own our website. That's our platform. You're on our website. We're calling the shots, right? Within reason. Reason. But if we're on a podcast, you're hearing us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Stitcher or Podbean or whatever. There are a million of them, or Google Podcasts. That's not our sandbox.
Right.
Our content is syndicated there, but that's not our sandbox. Same goes for, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, right? We don't own those platforms, but we adapt and customize our content for those platforms. And that's how you build a brand. That's how you become more than a blog. That's how you build a brand. The podcast and site integrate in more specific ways, in that we embed the podcast on individual portals on our site, where you can actually go read every full transcription of our podcast episode. So every time we release a podcast episode, within a couple of days, normally within 48 to 72 hours, there'll be a full transcription of the podcast on BarBend.com, along with more information, more detailed show notes, links to relevant content, other information about our guests. That's cool in a few different ways. One, it allows people to listen to that podcast on our site if maybe they're not a podcast listener, maybe they're not spending a lot of time on Spotify or Apple Podcasts.
Yep.
Cool. It also makes the podcast more accessible for people who might be hard of hearing, but they still want to get that content. They can read it in a visual format, which is we're really happy about, because we want to make our content accessible to a lot of people. Or if you just want more context on our guests. If we mention like a viral Instagram video or something in a podcast, we're talking about it, we can just embed that in that article and that portal on BarBend.
Absolutely.
Get that visual representation as well.
Absolutely. And I mean, I would think that it also helps kind of the SEO for BarBend, just period. I mean, the more keywords that you have out there in the content, embedded in the content, more long form content would I think help you in the long run, just building kind of the authority of the site itself.
Yep, it certainly does. It's tough to measure that specific benefit. Like
Sure.
when you measure SEO benefit, you're sometimes going qualitative over quantitative because you're like, maybe, you know, there are ways to measure it, but sometimes it's a little bit like, I think this is helping this much.
Right.
It's a bit more of an art than a science sometimes.
Fuzzy metrics.
Yeah. Blurred line.
A little more liquid. That's right, exactly right there.
It looks like it might be. Yeah, it might be something there. Yeah.
Wouldn't pass an audit, but yeah, we're going to use them if we need to for a VC. So I'm curious, when you approach a VC for a site like BarBend, what's the pitch? Is it we eventually are going to exit from this, we're going to sell it? I mean, what's the hook for a VC?
So it's worth noting, we don't have any institutional investors, actually. So our seed round was primarily like friends, family, angel investors. We have no institutional investors. So we did pitch VCs. I'm going to be real with you. We did. Some of them were interested, and the terms they put forth were not terms that we liked.
Yeah.
They were pretty aggressive, and we were like, whoa, not exactly. A lot of them wanted us to move the company to a different location because they were like, New York's really expensive. Come run the company here out of our office. And I was like, So we had some interest.
Central Kentucky.
We did not pitch any VCs in Central Kentucky. Surprising. Right? I think it was just like the terms, we just didn't come to an agreement on either side. And then some VCs weren't interested in us because some VCs were like, look, we just don't, we do content, but we don't do niche content, or we do niches, but we don't do niche content, right? Yep. So I think niche content has grown a lot in the past 4 years. I think it's a lot hotter than it was 4 years ago. You see a lot of direct-to-consumer companies that are using niche content to really convert customers and expand their customer base. 4 years ago, it wasn't quite that case.
Right.
I mean, there were some people, but I don't think they were doing it as well as they are.
Sure. I mean, the VC's also got to get their head around it. You know, it's not just the normal thing that they may talk about every day. You know, a content site, and so they're going, so it's like a library, it's like a blog, it's like a what?
It was also around the time, I think Snapchat was going public around that time. I could be wrong, but I think it was roughly around then. And so everyone was just like, yeah, so like, you know, how do you turn this into the next Snap? And I'm like, what do you mean? We do strength sports. Like that's a terrible comparison.
Exactly.
Like we're not a what?
Yeah, we want you to be the next Uber of weightlifting.
Yeah, make it Uber for weightlifting. I'm like, huh?
Airbnb, that's right.
I don't even know how that would work. Like what? So you rent a barbell set and then we come pick it. I don't know.
Share it with your neighbor. Yeah, that's it.
Sure. Yeah. It's a way to know your neighbor. That's why people do it. You're downstairs.
I love that. Go ahead.
I think there are more examples out there right now of content, especially niche content that's doing it really well. You have sites like The Athletic. I don't know if that's not as niche as we are, right? But they're killing it. You have sites like The Information. You have newsletter first companies like Morning Brew, The Skim, things like that. You know, they're established now. They're respected brands. 4 years ago, some of them didn't exist.
Right. I mean, it's amazing to kind of see that how things pop up and you know, sometimes they get traction and sometimes they just, you know, die a very quick death. And I was listening to another interview you were talking about it, and just the ideas of, you know, starting a site like this. And you touched on just a little bit on, if you can expand on that a little bit, the idea of what keeps you motivated to stay engaged with a site that is going to have a pretty long tail before it really starts showing some return. I mean, your sites are what, 12, 18 months, maybe 24 months before they really start gaining traction. For the majority of them under Jack Media, I think is what I remember. So
even
walk me
longer
through that process.
even longer sometimes. I mean, BarBends, thankfully, we're over that hump. You know, we're very much on the other side um, as far as revenue, attraction, and things like that. We are multimedia. We've made a lot of those leaps. Not that we still have plenty of leaps to make. Don't get me wrong. It takes a lot of patience, and honestly, I know more people who have tried to start companies like this and have failed due to they just run out of patience and they don't have enough time tolerance, than have failed because they made some catastrophic business error.
Sure.
And that sounds crazy, right? Like people weren't making mistakes, but they just stopped.
Right.
Because they were like, this isn't moving fast enough. I want to move on to something else. I've seen more niche and boutique content companies fall by the wayside because of that than because there wasn't an opportunity or because there was some terrible mismanagement or something like that. That's just the truth of it. You just like, what's the secret sauce to being patient and like gritting through it? I don't know. I'm from Kentucky. We're great at just kind of putting our head down and getting through stuff. I think we are. You know what I mean? Like, that if I were from California, I definitely wouldn't have made it. No, I'm kidding. I'm absolutely joking. I'm absolutely. But I don't know. It's just it's like sometimes you just have to grit it and hope it works out. And no game plan is 100%. Like I firmly believe in business that you can have the best team in the world, the best investors in the world, the best business model in the world. Nothing is 100% guaranteed.
Sure.
At all.
Yeah, that is. I mean, that's absolutely true. And I, as you were talking there, I was wondering. So, how important would you say passion for the subject is? Do you have to love the subject to be able to stay in the boat with it, or is it one of these things you say, well, I don't really care about granola, but I know that that's a hot topic right now that we can talk about. So how important is that?
A granola site? Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, no. Yeah,
I would love to invest. I want to be one of your seed investors. I'm more of a just general oatmeal guy. Passion counts because it's a short-term differentiator, but it's also a long-term differentiator. Where I think it matters the least is weirdly in the middle phases, right? It matters when people first see your brand, and then when they see your brand after you've kind of made it over that hump of traction. It's when they first see your brand, that passion shows through. Like, is this content good? Is it authentic? Is it by people who care and know what they're talking about? And then when people start seeing your brand everywhere, are they still passionate, authentic, and knowledgeable about their subject? If the answer is yes during both times, guess what? You've just gotten yourself a reader or a listener or a viewer for life. You've just gotten yourself a subscriber or a follower, right? But you have to hit them because people will see, a lot of people saw BarBend very early on, and then they probably didn't see BarBend for like another year or something like that. Or until, maybe they saw our coverage of the CrossFit Games in 2016, and they didn't see us again until our coverage of the games the next year, because that's when they tune into that kind of thing, right? But if the answer is yes, we're authentic and give great value to those users, those listeners, those viewers on during both of those times, when they first see us and then when they start seeing us pop up a lot because we've gained a lot of traction, you got them. Great. You've left a great impression for the lifetime of that relationship you have with them. So it is important. And a lot of people ask, they're like, I've been asked this a few times on a few different podcasts. Oh, well, that passion you can kind of build in later on, or you can build that expertise later on. If you do it later on, you're missing the boat on that first point of contact. And if you do it early on, but you don't care about it later on, you miss the boat on that second point of contact. You have to have it during both times. And I think during both of those very important contact points for people who can be your Uber users, your readers, your people who are interacting with your content literally every day. And that's what you want.
So I got two quick questions. What happens if they find you in the middle?
Ooh.
Between those 2 points? And the second one is, go ahead and you can answer that one, and I'll ask you the second one.
Well, that middle point is different for everyone, right? Which is why you have to stay authentic and passionate the whole time. And as your team grows, those first hires you have, they're incredibly important because that's kind of taking you through that gritting period, that time before you're gaining that traction. They're in the trenches with you. You never know when that midpoint's going to be for someone, right? For a user or a reader, right? So it could be anywhere during a calendar year or during, over the course of a longer reading cycle than that, or engagement cycle. So you do have to have that all throughout. I use that as an example of like, here's how you break it down to one reader or viewer or listener's experience. But I mean, not everyone's interacting with things at the same time. So there are infinite iterations along that timeline.
I've asked a variation of that question dozens and dozens of times to guests on Rising Tide, and I have to say that is the best answer I've ever heard to the question related around, is passion a real requirement to be able to sustain you through the difficult times. So I give you a hand clap and applause in the middle of the podcast here. That was awesome. And I think a perfect segue into kind of our next segment, because, brother, you're on a roll right now. So as you grab the mic and you become our professor in one of my favorite parts of the interview that talks about kind of the Rising Tide Startup School, and just walk our listeners through, they're sitting in the cube, they want to escape, they want to jump over the wall and make a run for it on a Friday afternoon and say, Monday morning, I'm going to be doing something different. Give us 2 or 3 just key steps to kind of think through. You can niche it down however you want to, but just kind of walk us through just a real quick process of just as somebody is thinking about starting something, what are some things they really need to think through?
First off, I'd say try and identify your weaknesses. We can never be objective about ourselves as humans. So you might have to ask people. You might have to ask a loved one, a significant other, a former coworker, a colleague, what are your weaknesses? Because you're going to need to find you're going to need to work on those weaknesses first off, but you're also probably going to need to find business partners or early hires who can help you address those weaknesses or make up for that slack. We all have weaknesses. Try and identify what yours are. That's going to really influence how you build your company, especially in the early stages. Identify your risk tolerance, right? Are you willing to take a significant lifestyle change in starting a business or joining a startup? Not even just for founders, for early stage employees. Identify your risk tolerance. That also means risk tolerance when it comes to a changing quality of life, because your take-home pay may go way down. It may change. Your circumstances may change. Your working hours may change. So identify what you're bad at. Identify your risk tolerance. And then the third thing I would say is, if you are a quantitative person, get qualitative. If you're a qualitative person, get quantitative, right? Make sure you can make assessments on quality of product and audience, and then also make sure you can make data-oriented assessments regarding the quantitative outlooks in your space. I like to think that no one's perfectly balanced. Some of us are quantitative, some of us are qualitative. And it goes back to finding your weaknesses, right? Look on the other side of the coin. Try and combine the two. If you are an amazing statistician, but your product is crap, well, that's going to be a problem. If you have an amazing product, but you don't know who to market it to, that's also going to be a problem. Try and really become a student of both sides of that coin when it comes to whatever product or industry you're interested in entering into. And a really great way to do that is to look at what competitors are doing. Talk to people who might not be competitors, but might have analogs in different fields or industries. So those are the 3 things I would say to look at if you're sitting around and you're like, man, I got an idea, I want to run with it. What do I need to start considering now? I'd say those 3 things.
So as you're kind of trying to identify strengths and weaknesses, I mean, other than asking people kind of in a 360 around you, are there some other tools or things that you might suggest that people could use to help them identify? I mean, is it through strength finders or something like that they could maybe look to and as just kind of additional resources?
That's a good question. I don't have an excellent answer for that off the top of my head. I think that I love asking people I work with for feedback on how I'm approaching things. One of the greatest sources of information about yourself that I don't think a lot of people tap into is former coworkers and colleagues. Be they people who have left where you are right now, or people you worked with, before you left a previous job. go back to the people. If you still have contact with people you're working with 3 years ago, whether it was at a different position, in a different department, at a different company, they're at a different company now. Ask them for some feedback. Take them out for coffee. Buy them dinner. Be like, hey, what was I like? You know what I mean? Tell it to me straight. They're a great source of information about you and about an outside perspective and a more objective perspective on you. And why not tap into that? Can't hurt to ask.
What a great idea to not just current work colleagues but former work colleagues. And they've kind of lost the kind of the dog in the hunt. They can be as open with you as they can. That's exactly right. And especially if you give them that open that door and say, hey, I'm too old for you to hurt my feelings. Please, give me the raw data here that I'm seeking. I'm an open book. It's a safe space here, safe harbor. So lay it on me.
Do it in public exactly.
That's exactly
maybe in a
right.
public setting, like a park.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great idea. So what would you, I'm just curious if you, this was all scrapped and you were waking up Monday morning and you're starting something brand new, what would it be?
I'd write comic books.
Write comic books.
Easy answer. I'd write comic books.
Okay, so I'm going to pin you to the wall. What's keeping you from doing that right now?
Nothing. I should. I actually have a couple ideas in my head I should start working on this weekend. I love comic books. I love studying the craft of creating comic books. I've read many books about the theory behind comic book creation and story, from the art to the to the storylines, to the dialogue, to the art direction. I should. I don't have an excuse.
Well, we're going to recap and we're going to swing back in about 12 months and you're going to be going, what's BarBend? I have no idea. I'm the next
I really doubt that.
Marvel.
But,
I'm a Marvel competitor.
Barbell man. I don't know.
Yeah, the Marvel. That's what it is. That's right. There's no copyright infringement there whatsoever. You just go with it. So, well, David, man, I have really enjoyed this chat today. And is there anything that we haven't touched on that you just want to kind of leave with our audience today, and just to wrap up, and maybe just once again remind them where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, I mean, we've covered a lot of ground, so I don't want to add too much. Maybe we'll get to do a part two at some point in the near future. But
you're welcome anytime.
It's been a pleasure chatting with you. If people want to follow along with BarBend, visit barbend.com. Find us at BarBend on most social media platforms, YouTube, etc. We love hearing from people. Let us know how we're doing. Let us know what we can do better. We'd love to hear from you. Personally, I'm at D_Tao, D_TAO on Twitter, and then I'm at David Thomas Tao on Instagram. Send me a message, tweet at me, whatever you want. I'm pretty responsive.
I'm really shocked that BarBend was available when you bought it.
No one had used it. That's a whole other story. I could go off on for like an hour on how surprised I was. It was there.
Amazing.
I think it cost like $3 or $4 or something like that.
Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, that seems like it's a pretty short name, and it certainly, kind of touches on what you do. So, what a great opportunity you had to get the URL.
I will never buy a URL like that for that price ever again. It will not happen.
They don't exist. That's exactly right. Too many people camping on domains out there for sure. But David, thanks again, man. I hope you have a great weekend, and it's truly been a pleasure having you on Rising Tide and just sharing your story with us and kind of giving us a tremendous amount of value in a very short period of time, and just really playing your part in helping all boats rise in a rising tide. David, thanks again.